everyone. I'm Caroline McKinnon from the Inclusive Research Collective, and I'd like to welcome you to our final event of the Small Talks for Big Change seminar series. These events are a collaboration between the Perivoli Africa Research Centre and the Inclusive Research Collective, and they are a series of sessions where we begin to look at the layers of power imbalances between research collaborations between the global north and researchers in the African continent. These events are being recorded for colleagues who can't attend live, and if you missed the previous events in these series, we will be sharing links to those recordings which have closed captions available in either English or French. And if you would like closed captions for this live event, please click the button that says CC at the bottom of your screen to enable these. We recognise the importance of honest conversation, but as a polite notice, we do expect our speakers and other attendees to be treated with respect at all times, and failure to do so will result in removal from these sessions. And if you have any questions, please put these in the Q&A or chat for afterwards. Today's session follows the very successful launch of the Charter, which we've been talking about in previous sessions. And the IRC would like to extend our congratulations to Park and all the collaborators involved in this wonderful event. And today we welcome Professor Agnes Nairn, fresh from that launch ceremony, who is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Global Engagement at the University of Bristol. Agnes started at the University of Bristol in 2017 after 2 years as Dean of Hult International Business School in London. Agnes pursued a portfolio career between 2006 and 2015, dividing her time between policy consultancy and a post as Professor of Marketing at EM Lyon Business School in France. And Agnes's research focuses on the relationship between the commercial world and young people's well-being, drawing on a mix of psychology, sociology, cultural theory, and neuroscience. And Agnes is currently Specialist Advisor to the House of Lords Communication Committee's inquiry into the advertising industry. Agnes, thank you so much for joining us today, especially, as I say, after coming straight from the successful Charter launch yesterday. Briefly, I will pass over to Isabella for an overview of our series. So Isabella, over to you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and welcome everybody, and welcome Agnes. And what you forgot to mention is that Agnes is the chair of the management board of Park, and it's been a wonderful journey, Agnes, so far. So it's great that you're going to give the last talk in this series. But very briefly, just to follow the tradition of the previous talks, I'm going to show a slide. It's going to be slightly different from the one you've seen so far. It's an updated version. I hope you can see there. So as Caroline has already indicated, and for those of you who've seen the previous talks, you will know this series of talks, Small Talks for Big Change, has been all about considering the need for transformative research collaborations between actors in Africa and those outside of the continent, in particular in the global north. And when we say transformative research collaborations, we mean collaborations that redress each of the multiple layers of power imbalance that typically pervade the joint production of scientific knowledge between actors in Africa and those outside of the continent. Beginning with imbalances at the level of epistemologies, language, theories, and concepts, imbalances that arise from those and are captured in the development frame and the unidirectional gaze that it imposes, usually from the global north to Africa, and imbalances in the resourcing and capabilities and infrastructures between institutions in Africa and those in the global north. And then lastly, imbalances that are informed by all of the preceding ones, in the division of labor, in decision-making, and the arrangements, the practical arrangements of collaborations. All of the talks so far have spoken to each of these layers. Today, the last talk in this series speaks to the Charter, which we launched yesterday, and which really captures ways forward for redressing these imbalances in research collaborations, hopefully in the future. And with that, I want to hand over to you, Agnes, to speak more about the Charter and the launch. And thank you once more for all that you've done to support us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Isabella, and hi to everybody. And it's really very, very exciting to be speaking from Windhoek in Namibia, where we launched the Charter yesterday. So this is absolutely hot off the press. And I'm delighted to have been asked by Isabella to give this final talk in the Small Talks for Big Change. I'm very honoured. Why Windhoek? Well, Windhoek's where the 22nd Conference of Rectors, Vice-Chancellors and Presidents of African Universities is taking place between the 4th and 7th of July. So this is a gathering of all the leaders of African universities and African higher education institutes, 600 people at this conference. So it's a really significant place in the continent to be launching the Charter. Yesterday was joyous, I think is the best word. So much enthusiasm, goodwill, curiosity, hope. And we know that this is just the beginning of what's going to be a very robust process to ensure that everyone who's involved in science or knowledge production, if you prefer, is ready to do their bit to take a long, hard look at these power imbalances that we've been discussing through the series, and to start to make them a much more balanced relationship between the mighty continent of Africa and the global north. This is not going to be a cosmetic or a superficial process. It's going to be done in a very deep and systematic way. Let me just tell you a little bit about the event, because it was big and it was significant. It was opened by the Amadomu group of singers and dancers who did a fantastic Namibian, very colourful hunting song and dance, and I think that got us all in the mood. We then had a welcome from three very significant people, from Dr. Selma Levendelvo from UNAM, the University of Namibia, who are hosting, and then Professor Oyewola, who's the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities, and also Ernest Arete, who's the Secretary General of the African Research Universities Alliance. So, the big networks and the hosts of the conference were welcoming us, and I think that's very significant. It was a 4-hour session, so it was a marathon. And it was emceed very ably by Professor Ambrina Maggi, who's the Dean of International for Africa at Cardiff University. So we started off with the 3 vice-chancellors of the 3 institutions that facilitated the Charter, all women. So we had our own VC, Professor Evelyn Welsh. We had Professor Puleng Lenkabula, who's the Vice-Chancellor of UNISA, and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Professor Sue Harrison. And they all talked about what the Charter means to the facilitating universities. And then we had James Alexandrov, who, of course, is the funder of the Perivoli Africa Research Centre. And he was delighted and indeed had a tear in his eye when the Charter was launched. So it was a wonderful start. Then Isabella, Devine and Puleng, who we're now calling the Triumvirate, made the case for the Charter that they've already made very powerfully in these sessions, and they did it just as powerfully on a fantastically big stage in Africa. We then, in the third session, we opened out to stakeholders beyond the kind of the inner sanctum who devised the Charter, I guess, and this was chaired by Professor Wisdom Tete from the University of Toronto, Scarborough campus. And they've launched a charter on anti-Black racism and Black inclusion. And I think we have some interesting things to learn from them in terms of how do you take a charter forward. So it was wonderful to have Wisdom guiding this. And in the panel, we had a big range of stakeholders, which I think symbolizes how the charter is going to be rolled out to a lot of very different people. So we had Dr. Fonte Akum, who's the exec director of the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa. This is a think tank, so they're one set of stakeholders. We had Dr. Julien Bobineau, who's the chair of the Development Cooperation Working Group of Coimbra, which is a European network of universities to which we belong. We had Professor Abdulwahab Egeboli from the Association of West African Universities, Dr. Nokathulu Muchunu, who's the Deputy Director of the Africa Open Science Platform, who's also in the NRF. So we had a funder there, and also Dr. Carly Coetzee, who's the President of the African Studies Association, which is based in Oxford. So we had the stakeholders. Wisdom had a session with them and then invited the floor to talk, and we had lots of collaboration from the floor too. Just picking out a few of the things, there were some big statements such as, well, this charter should be the starter for all world systems. So that was very big picture. We had some interesting reflections from the African leaders saying, you know, the continent needs to take responsibility, not to go with a begging bowl, to look for African funding from African businesses, for example. There was quite a lot of reflection around funding and taking responsibility. And then there was some more kind of nitty-gritty stuff, such as, well, we need to make sure that if it's an external funder, that African researchers are paid in their local currency. So I think that the challenge we have are going to be large scale, and they're also going to be quite nitty-gritty. Then in the fourth session, Isabella talked about the roadmap, which I will spend most of my time talking about. We then, and the technology worked brilliantly. We had videos in from, my technology's gone funny, videos in from a number of people who had signed up to the charter, including Lord Boateng, the Vice-Chancellor of Ghana, and the University of Exeter, King's College London. Then we had the speakers from the previous sessions came up on stage to sign, and then other people were invited to come, and that's when the queue started. So there then formed this huge queue of people wanting to sign the charter, and we quickly went off and photocopied lots more copies of the charter, and we ended up with 86 signatories on day one, which is pretty phenomenal. So very, very exciting. So I'll now share my slides, and we'll have a look at some of the charter principles that I think most people here at the moment won't have seen. And these, you've heard of the case for the charter already. I'll then talk through the principles and then some of the aspirations. So let me share my screen. If you just let me know if this is working okay. Is that working okay?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Can you see me, or am I a bit blurry?
You're a bit blurry, but we can see your screen.
Okay, that's more important that you see the screen. So you'll recognize on the left-hand side these layers of power imbalance that Isabella has been talking about. And on the right, we have the principles to redress these. So if we look through, we start with the imbalance in epistemology, where we've got a predominance of Western-centric epistemologies and a non-consideration or use or generation of alternative ones. So what this means is those signing up to the charter will pledge to, when they have a research collaboration, they'll start with an initial critical examination and acknowledgement that there are different epistemic positions from the collaborator. So that will be a transparent start. And also an assumption of the non-universal validity and the decentering of Western-centric epistemic orientations, and a chance to look at new alternatives. So that's the first. It will be this, when we start a project, we say, okay, let's just look at what other epistemologies might be open to use. The next power imbalance is in language, and you'll have heard, I think, from Divine that, and you'll know yourselves that there's a predominance of Western language, in English and predominantly actually with some French as the medium for generation and dissemination of knowledge, and a non or very marginal use of African languages, often just for interpretation of fieldwork, for example. Therefore, the principle will be, at least where the focus is on phenomenon in the continent, African languages will be centered at every stage of the knowledge production system. So conception and the design and the data collection and the analysis and the interpretation and the dissemination. So that will be our second set of principles. The third layer, as Isabella showed on that slide, is the theory or concepts or this extroversion towards the West. And we know that there's just as there is a predominance of Western epistemologies, there's also a predominance of Western-centric concepts and theories and academic research, and an inherent turning towards the West for scientific theory and a non-generation of alternatives. And therefore, the principles in the Charter say that when a collaboration begins, there should be a critical examination and an acknowledgement of the theoretical positions, just as there has been an acknowledgement of the epistemological positions, and an assumption that the Western theories are not universal and there may be different ways generated from the continent of knowing. Oops. Trying to get to my next slide. There we go. Whoops. Sorry. There we go. The next layer, as we've heard, is this development, and you can't really see my picture, but I'm putting it in inverted commas, this development frame, because this word development is a very unhelpful framing that tends to see Africa as in need of development, whereas the global north is seen as already developed and as a site of deficiency, where the global north gazes towards the underdeveloped or the developing continent of Africa, and where that gaze is very rarely reversed. We very rarely have Africa research on what is happening in the global north, which underprivileges the position of the African continent. And there's an assumption that the problematics and the solutions are generated in the global north without looking at alternatives. So for those who've signed up the Charter, it will be a pledge to seek to, I mean, even if, particularly where there are global challenges, that the focus will be on what Africa wants to research, not necessarily what the global north assumes Africa wants to research, and that gaze will be returned, or indeed in some cases actually reversed, and a decentering of what the global north thinks the problems are and what the solutions are, and a concentration on generating alternative accounts. The next layer then is resourcing, and as we all know, the resourcing in the continent is vastly inferior to the resourcing in the global north, which makes it very difficult to sustain the collaborative research efforts from Africa. And current funding regimes don't help this, just as current funding regimes tend to assume that they know what should be researched in Africa, predominantly health research, and not very much research on AI or robotics. The funding regimes also tend to focus on short-term projects, which means there's never quite enough time to build capacity and institutional capabilities. So this action, I guess, is particularly for the funders, and it's looking to establish funding streams that will strengthen institutional resources, including research management, which is very important. So for the African partner to have a real strengthening of their resourcing, and indeed for there to be more programs, I would say, rather than projects that are sustained over the long term, because that then allows African partners to build some of the capacity that's so needed. And finally, the practical arrangements, and I think, as has been addressed before in this series, there has been quite a lot of work done by other actors on the practical arrangement. So making sure that it's not the global north comes up with the ideas, says, does anyone know somebody in Uganda? Swoop into Uganda, basically extract the knowledge, go back to the global north and analyze it and take all the high value parts. That's unfortunately typical of quite a lot of research that happens between the global north and the global south. The decision-making power is all taken in the global north, the research foci, the objectives, the methods, how the budget's allocated, how the sample is come about, how the data is collected. And I suppose, and finally, and importantly, the lead authors are often in the global north and not in Africa. And we know that there's, I think it's only 16, African researchers and the topmost cited researchers. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible power imbalance at that level. And so those signing up to the Charter will be seeking as a first and preferred option for both the intellectual and institutional leadership to be taken by the African partner as a very deliberate choice. And then to look at, for example, the 4 approaches to supporting equitable partnership good practice document, and there are other frames that in a very practical level help to make these partnerships much more equitable. So that is the Charter. Those are the principles. There are also these aspirations. I mean, the principles I think are very clear. You can see how they map very clearly onto the concentric circle of the multiple power imbalances. And of course, we need a lot of people from a lot of different organizations to help this happen. So obviously HE institutions, but also the funders, also the assessment bodies, governments, international science bodies, and the publishers themselves. We need all of them on board. So finally, I would just say the hard work starts now. There isn't an ineluctable path forward. There will be many challenges from many quarters. There will be forces trying to undermine the work, unquestionably. And I think there are responsibilities on everyone listening here and the many, many stakeholders who are not listening here to take this forward. But finally, I would say this is the moment. This is definitely the moment for the Africa Charter for transformative research collaborations. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to 5 years' time when we can look back and see what we've achieved. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Agnes. And yeah, after having worked on this seminar series, it was lovely to be able to see all the Charter principles written down. So thank you for that. Please may I start with a question about the University of Bristol. How important is this Charter for the University of Bristol? How important was it for us to be involved in this Charter? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
It's extremely important. I think the fact that our Vice-Chancellor flew out here, was here for less than 24 hours before flying back for a Board of Trustees meeting, so that she could be on that stage with the other Vice-Chancellors signing the document, is symbolically incredibly important. It really is a big part of the Bristol DNA. This, social justice is one of our research themes. It's something that we want the world to know us for. And this year we're particularly focusing on our work in Africa. We've signed this very comprehensive strategic international partnership agreement with the University of Cape Town, who, of course, are very solidly involved in the Charter. So strategically, it's very important to us in terms of our thought leadership and our principles and our values.
That's great, thank you. And then following from that, so Isabella and also yourself have spoken about how the roadmap and the hard work starts now. That's not to undermine all the hard work that's gone into the production of the Charter, but now the implementation of everything that we would like to do. How are we going to do that? Firstly, within the University of Bristol, but also we do have attendees who are not at the University of Bristol. So what can the university do to make sure that this Charter is known throughout not only the UK, but also further afield? And also what can we do to help that roadmap along?
I think publicity is certainly one thing. I mean, Twitter was going a bit mad yesterday, but telling people about it. We now have a charter. We now have a document. It's available in the Perivale Africa Research Centre website. So I think many people belong to many networks that belong to many other networks. So telling people about it is important. People can sign up to it on the PARC website. So getting people to sign up to it. I don't know how many more have signed up to it today. So that's just getting it out there is very, very important. Beyond that, I mean, we will have a secretariat of the three facilitating universities to kind of hold the project together. But then we've formed this loose coalition of interested parties who were there yesterday, who are here today. And we'll be setting out a program of work for the different people we need to influence. So we need to influence policymakers. We need to influence funders. We need to do more scholarly work on how this works. We need case studies. So at the end of the process, we hope we'll have a standard and best practice for how to do this kind of research. But on the way along, we're certainly looking for people who would like to be involved in influencing these various constituents that we need to buy in. That last slide I showed you shows the different levels of people we need, and different people will have different contexts in order to be able to do that in different interests. So hope that answers your question.
No, definitely. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hopefully being part of at least the communication. If there's anything else that IRC can do, we'd be delighted to.
Thank you.
And as you were going through some of the Charter principles, we heard from Puleng Sahalo in a previous session about the importance of what we teach, how we teach, who teaches, and that all links into decolonising, diversifying our curricula as well. And although this Charter speaks specifically to research collaboration, it appears that there is quite a lot of crossover with also potentially our teaching as well. So I was wondering, do you see this as well as a way of not only influencing research collaborations, but also being able to have a positive impact on our teaching as well?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, we're just at the beginning of our journey at Bristol and having strategic international research-led partnerships. So our partnership with the University of Cape Town. And our idea in having these strategic international partnerships is that it'll be baked in for research, but also for our education and also for our professional services staff. So we're sharing like research management, for example. So we've got some joint professorships and fellowships with UCT that I think they've just closed. The call for that's just closed, but we're also hoping to do collaborative online international learning with our partners. And I think that's definitely where, we know that we're key signatories to this charter. When we're doing educational initiatives together, we'll clearly be looking at underpinning it with that. But I mean, I think more broadly, I mean that, the three Vice-Chancellors at Bristol, Phil for research, Tansy for education, and myself for global engagement, we're working increasingly closely together so that the things that are important to the university strategically will will feed across all three elements: the research element, the education element, and the global engagement element of it. So I think partly because the university is joining up like that, and also because our international partnerships are going to be founded on multiple levels of collaboration. I think it will almost, by default, will spill over into our education, definitely.
And I think that's, again, just another really positive thing as well. And it will just supplement the fantastic work that's going on at the minute in the University of Bristol with decolonising, particularly in the medical school. There's a lot going on there in life sciences, in other areas of health sciences as well. I know there's lots of work that's going on even in the STEM subjects, let alone in the social sciences, where the STEM people kind of stole the social sciences ideas from. So yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I think it's great that this is going to be a charter that is not just going to be a tick box exercise, that it has been incredibly well thought out. There's been multiple stakeholders involved in the creation of it. You've said that the change is now and the time is now. Why is that?
I think that's a really good question. I think that people are talking about it more. I mean, the time is now because you can feel that there's a movement, that there have been a lot of frameworks around some of the practicalities of equitable partnerships. And there are quite a lot of Leeds launched one a couple of weeks, their knowledge equitable, KEN, knowledge equity network. It's just everyone's really interested in it. And I think the fact that 76 people got up after a 4-hour session to stand in a queue to come and sign a document that they felt moved to sign tells you that the time is now, to be quite honest. People are literally voting with their feet.
And I have to say as well, Agnes, I did have a smile on my face where I saw at the charter launch you were trying to take a photograph of everyone and you just couldn't because there were so many people in front of you, and you thought, I feel you, I'm not very tall, and I thought,
yeah, neither am I.
that would be me. I'd be going, oh, there's too many people.
It was extraordinary. It was quite extraordinary. Yeah. It
was a fantastic launch event, and again we extend our congratulations to everybody that was involved in that launch event yesterday. We've come to the end of this session. They are very short events, which again we've said that there's no way that we can do service to any of those particular layers of imbalance within this such a short time frame. But what this series hoped to do would be just to highlight these power imbalances to attendees, and also to get people thinking about the way that they work within their research collaborations, and hopefully make some changes as a result and bring awareness of the charter as well. We are hoping that what this means is that there'll be more work going forwards in the next academic year. So to attendees, after the session, we will send out a link as well to a very short questionnaire. I promise it will take 1 to 2 minutes maximum. It's just so that we can report back on how useful you have found these sessions, and also what you would find useful going forwards. So finally, from me, I would like to thank all of the speakers that we've had within these series. I've found them incredibly engaging and informative, and I know a lot more now about things like extroversion and things, which I have gone off and I have looked up. So thank you on behalf of myself for introducing these concepts to me, which meant I went off to do a bit of personal learning. Huge thank you to Park on behalf of the IRC for allowing you to work on this series with you. It really has been a huge honour for us to be able to be part of this session, and we really look forward to all of these charter principles being put into place. Finally, another thank you to you, Agnes, for taking the time today to come and talk to us. Really look forward to this charter. being launched at the University of Bristol and seeing what we can do from Bristol to make sure that this is implemented going forward. So thank you very much indeed for your time as well.
Thank you very much.